Battlestar Galactica by Glenn A. Larson and Robert Thurston. Chapter 5, Part 2. Serena led Apollo down a series of hallways which normally housed the lowest class passengers on the Rising Star. People were crowded into its narrow cubicles. "I would have thought a celebrity like you would do a little better than this," Apollo said. "A neat little compartment of your own on the elite levels." "I was offered that, from several men whose approaches were quite subtle. Anyway, I had no interest in pulling space. I took what I could get, fairly." "I believe you." She was startled by the warm sincerity of his comment. She might like this captain after all, even if he did have a ramrod up his spine. "I want you to help me with the little boy," Serena said. "Little boy? The one I saw in Caprica?" "Yes, Boxy's his name. I found him in the rubble during the bombings." "What's wrong with him?" Apollo asked. "I'm afraid it isn't good. A mild form of shock. He hasn't eaten or slept since the bombing." "You have food?" "I managed to get some from Sire Yuri. On upper level, Boxy won't eat it." "I'll have him dispatched to the life station right away." "I don't think that's going to be the answer. I don't know what to do. The poor kid's blocked out all memory. Can't tell me anything about his family or where he comes from. All he ever talks about is that little Daggett that got killed while they were running through the streets. He doesn't know it's dead. Thinks it's just lost. Maybe you might be able to help." "Me? If he won't eat for you, I don't know what I can do."
"Well, if you remember, he seemed to spark a little when you talked to him on Caprica. Frankly, I got the feeling you're pretty good with children, Captain."
Serena didn't understand the brief, sad look that crossed Apollo's face, but she began to see that the aloof young captain was more complicated than she had thought. "I grew up with a kid brother," Apollo said. "Well, let's take a look at your little Boxy." Serena led him down a long companionway in which refugees had crammed into many improvised living quarters. Some of the little niches were already decorated with simple makeshift remnants. A couple even had curtains up hiding blank walls. They stopped by a niche which had a curtain drawn across its entranceway. A dim night light inside showed through the thin material of the drapery. He glanced at Serena, who told him to go inside. Entering, he found the young boy lying on a cot and staring at the ceiling. "Excuse me," Apollo said. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." The boy's eyes widened as he recognized his visitor. "I'm in charge of finding young men to try out as future fighter pilots. Your name is Boxy, correct?"
"Uh-huh."
Apollo nodded. He moved to the edge of the bed and crouched down beside it. The boy, in fear or awe, shifted backward to the wall side of his cot. "Good," Apollo said. "I've been looking all over for you, you know. You should have made contact with the commander. We're very short on pilots." The boy looked quizzical. Apollo could remember teasing Zack and obtaining a similar look in response.
"I'm too little to be a pilot,"
Boxy said. "Oh, sure, right now. But how long do you think it takes to become a full colonial warrior?"
"I don't know."
"You have to start when you're very small, or you won't get these until you have gray hair." Apollo pointed to the captain's bars on his shoulder. Interested, Boxy lifted his head to stare at the shiny emblems. "You like them?" Apollo asked. Boxy seemed about to respond enthusiastically, but the interest vanished as quickly as it had come, and he put his head back on his pillow.
"I want Muffet,"
the child said. Tears came to Serena's eyes, and she wondered if she could back out of the small quarters, stay out of sight in the hallway until the captain was through or had given up. "Well, I don't know," Apollo said. "Not much room for a Daggett in a fighter plane."
"He's gone. He ran away."
"Oh? Well, maybe we can find one of Muffet's friends."
"There are no Daggetts, I asked."
Apollo glanced back at Serena. His face seemed less severe in the dim light. She didn't know what to say. "Well," Apollo said to Boxy, "tell you what. Here, you take one of these." He removed one of the bars from his shoulder and placed it above the pocket of the boy's tunic. "You take this until I furnish you with the proper emblem. Now, as Colonial Warrior First Level, you are entitled to the first daggett that comes along." He rose and started for the door, where he hesitated, then said, "But only on the condition that you get your rest, eat all of your primaries, and stop chasing girls. Good night, officer." He saluted and went out. Serena followed, but could not resist one peek backward. She saw Boxy looking down at the bar that Apollo had pinned on him. In the corridor, Apollo waited for her.
"Thank you,"
she said.
"See, I was right. You are good with kids. You and your brother must be very close."
"We were."
"I'm sorry. The war?"
"I suppose."
"Look, if you'd rather not involve yourself with—"
"Don't be silly. I've already lost the big one. I can stand a few little ones to win."
"That's not a little one in there, Captain. You and that one, you've accomplished something."
"Sure, cheered up a 6-year-old. I'm afraid that's not—"
"I'm afraid it is, whether you want to admit it or not."
A hint of smile appeared again on Apollo's face. A potentially handsome smile, Serena was careful to note. "I'm sorry, but I do have to go now," Apollo said. "Have to check out elite level."
"I hope your reaction to it is similar to mine, Captain."
"I don't understand."
"You will."
He gave her a half salute and strode down the companionway. Serena noted with a wry interest that the captain no longer seemed so aloof and detached in her eyes. Apollo found an elevator that went directly to the elite level of the Rising Star. As soon as its doors closed in front of him, devices were activated that had originally been designed to prepare the vacationer for his stay in the elite quarters of a luxury spaceliner. Subtle perfumes drifted out of the air vents. They suggested food or sex, depending on which direction the elevator rider was facing. A bizarre style of music, quiet, soothing, intricately melodic, emerged from speakers positioned strategically all around the elevator car. In an odd subliminal way, the music seemed to suggest romantic joys to come. Apollo recognized the insipid melody as a series of variations on a Leon chant. That was likely, since Sire Yuri was a Leo. What struck Apollo as odd about the music was that the song was originally an agricultural chant celebrating the wonders of the harvest. The elevator version had changed the simple tune into a ridiculously complex and unrhythmic love melody. A golden light switched on suddenly above the doorway to signal that the elevator was stopping at the primary elite level. The perfumes faded, and the music diminished as the doors slid open. Apollo's eyes hurt from the amount of gilt ornamentation that he now faced. As he stepped into the reception area, he noticed with annoyance that an absurd gilt sign spelled Club Elite over the doorway leading to the level's inner sanctums. Apollo had traveled on a luxury liner a couple of times when there were no sensible accommodations available, and he did not recall from either of those trips anything approaching the ugly embellishments that decorated the reception area. As Apollo's eyes became accustomed to the ornate glare, he was startled by Boomer's voice resounding through the small chamber. "Officer, I will ask you only once more to step aside." Boomer was addressing a stocky, muscular guard whose broad body blocked the closed entranceway to the inner quarters. "Sir," the guard said in a bored voice, as if he was used to discouraging other passengers of the liner from gate-crashing the luxury quarters, "this is a private accommodation secured by Sire Yuri and his party." "I don't care if it's— May I remind you, sir, that Sire Yuri is a newly elected member of the Fleet Council. He has ordered me to see that he is in no way disturbed by intruders."
How's this for an intrusion, Daggett mate? Boomer's intrusion was his sidearm, whose barrel was now pointing at the guard's left nostril. The guard looked surprised, but not really scared. Boomer might be causing more trouble than was necessary, Apollo thought. Might be better to proceed a bit closer to the book. "What's going on, Boomer?" he said, striding forward. "Fella here doesn't seem to want to let us in the club area." "Is that true, soldier?" "Yes, well, Sire Yuri said..." "Do you recognize me, soldier?" "Yes, Captain Apollo." "Do you know I have complete authority to check out all levels of all ships by fleet order?" Yes, sir." "Are you going to let us through that door?" "Yes, sir." Apollo smiled at Boomer as the guard obsequiously ushered them through the doorway. Sometimes there were advantages to being the commander's son, after all. As they walked down a corridor just as overdecorated as the club lobby, Boomer muttered, "When I think of those starving people, Don't say it, Boomer. I hate this just as much as you do." The liner's grand ballroom had been transmogrified into what looked to Apollo suspiciously like a throne room. A series of tapestries depicting what he recognized as a famous hunting cycle from the planet Tauron hung along one wall. Other walls displayed paintings, sculptures, holoviews that Apollo was certain were confiscated from all over the 12 worlds. Yuri and his cohorts must have grabbed every artwork they could rescue from the dying planets, looting museums and galleries while citizens died around them. Before the Cylon invasion, Yuri had been famous throughout the colonies as a political manipulator of some skill. For a moment, it was difficult to locate Yuri amid the impressive artwork, the luxurious furniture, and the milling around, most of whom appeared to be elder statesmen and their courtesans. Almost everyone in the room was gathered around arrangements of food, shoveling victuals into their mouths with an obscene eagerness. Yuri lounged behind one of the largest food tables, almost obscured by a high pile of exotically colored fruit. He was still as handsome as Apollo remembered him and did not seem to have aged much at all. There was a suggestion of jowliness, a bit of a bulge at his waistband, likely results of the present orgy. But overall, Yuri still looked every bit the aristocratic politician who had been extremely popular all over the planet Leo. Beside him, with her arms around his neck, there was a scantily clad young woman whose vapid beauty was marred only by the food stains around her mouth. Apollo drew his sidearm and gestured to Boomer to do the same. As the revelers noticed the guns, the sounds of merriment diminished. When Apollo and Boomer walked slowly towards Sire Yuri, glazed-eyed people along their route drew back. Apollo stopped at Yuri's table. The man looked up at him with heavy-lidded eyes. "I trust you have an explanation for your intrusion," he said. "That's right," said the girl beside him. Apollo pushed her away from the sire and motioned for Yuri to stand up. Yuri was about an inch taller than Apollo, and he tried to take advantage of the height difference by assuming an imperious tone of voice. "What is this all about, young man?" Apollo stared scornfully at the handsome politician. "Would you like to make a statement before I arrest you, Sire Yuri?" Yuri gestured with his right hand, signaling all activity still proceeding to cease. Even the musician stopped playing abruptly. "I'm glad you know my name, sir," Sire Yuri said. "At least you'll know from where the blade fell." "Drop the cheap rhetoric, Sire Yuri. You're going to follow me to my shuttle." "I'll do nothing of the sort, young man. You've no jurisdiction aboard the Rising Star." "I have all the jurisdiction I need. I can take this garbage scow and appropriate it for the fleet if I so wish. Better yet, if you choose not to accompany me back to the command ship, I'll just turn the 6 levels of starving passengers beneath you loose. You can take your chances with them." Apollo gestured toward the overladen food table, and Yuri suddenly understood his message. Captain, he said, I'll grant you all this may seem, well, a bit excessive. Blame it on overenthusiasm. Excessive? Overenthusiasm? All this? I'd say obscene and— Wait just one moment, young man. I and my friends were merely enjoying a small, well-deserved celebration. You might call it our prayer of gratitude for deliverance. We've a right to— You've no right, no privilege of the Lord for this kind of celebration. In case it's eluded you, counselor, some 100 people have died since our deliverance from the Cylons. I was not aware of any cases of starvation, Captain. Maybe not. It may even be that hunger hasn't taken a life. Not yet, anyway. But it's only a matter of time if we don't strictly follow the rationing plan my father sent out to all fleet ships. If— Your father? Yes. Ah, then you're Commander Adama's son. Captain Apollo, I believe. I didn't recognize you. My deepest apologies. No wonder, then. I don't follow you, Sire Yuri. He glanced toward the immediate audience and drew himself taller. Obviously, what he was going to say next would be played to the crowd. I say, Captain, that it is no wonder that you are making this ill-timed power play. He turned toward the audience. You see, my friends, this young man is an emissary from his father, our honored commander. When he mentions appropriating this ship, he is quite serious, and we are not allowed to argue with the commander's son, after all. What are you saying? I am saying, Captain, that you will jump at any excuse to appropriate ships, to siphon off fuel for the Galactica, perhaps. I suspect that the reason you're throwing your weight around and not out of any compassion for hungry passengers. I recognize a political ploy when I see it, and you can just tell Adama that— Can it, Sire Yuri? With all due respect. Boomer, notify Corps Command that we've located some stores which we will distribute as far as they go. Yuri's face suddenly turned red with anger. This is a violation of proper procedure, young man, and I'll not allow it. You don't have that choice. I remind you, you're under arrest. Yuri took a deep breath before speaking again. Every morsel of this food is mine. I had it brought from my own estate, and it belongs to me and my guests. The law has not yet been written to confiscate personal property with a presidential order. Some of the guests clearly agreed with Yuri's aristocratic views, although Apollo could see that others were looking somewhat embarrassed and ashamed. The drunken young woman at Yuri's side snuggled closer to him and made a dramatically meaningful hand gesture in Apollo's direction. He wished he could arrest her and all the revelers who endorsed Yuri's view. Does your wife share your feelings about denying your food to others? Apollo asked, with a meaningful glance toward Yuri's strumpet. My wife? Yuri said weakly. Cyrus Yuri. I don't see her. Yuri could not maintain eye contact with Apollo, and he suddenly looked toward the thickly carpeted floor. Apollo remembered Cyrus Yuri as a plump gentlewoman whose main job in life had been discovering ways to rescue her impulsive husband from potentially dangerous situations. She had been kind to him and Zack when they visited her during their childhood. No, Cyrus Yuri is gone, Yuri said. Unfortunately, she did not arrive at the Rising Star in time to be rescued with the rest of us. Apollo did not for one moment believe the sob that Yuri placed into his voice when he spoke of her. My sympathies, Apollo said. I share your bereavement. Cyrus Yuri was an outstanding woman. Yuri's head remained bowed, dutifully it seemed. Yes, he whispered. I'm sure she'd be moved by your period of mourning and the style in which you choose to honor her memory. Boomer? Yes, Captain. Have Jolly send a team up here to collect and distribute this food throughout the ship. Sir, shouldn't we check with Corps Command? Now! He grabbed Yuri by the arm and rushed him out of the room. The young woman remained attached to the politician's arm for a few steps before falling into a drunken, glutted stupor onto the thick red carpet. While they awaited Jolly and his men, Boomer whispered to Apollo, "Without being critical, Captain, is there a chance you overplayed our hand a tad, considering Sire Yuri is on the new council? This isn't a card game, Boomer. Not one of yours and Starbuck's 2-bit cons. Those people down there are starving, damn it." "Take it easy, Cap. I'm on your side." "Are you sure?" "Captain." "Sorry, Boomer. I'm easily irritated these days. You must have noticed." "Well, now you mention it, yeah." The elevator arrived, and Jolly's large form seemed to fill the entire doorway. "Let's get to it," Apollo said. "Collect every scrap of food you can find here and get it to the people." The look of hatred from Sire Yuri as two of Jolly's men took him into the elevator sent a chill up and down Apollo's spine. Working gently, Dr. Pei positioned Cassiopeia's broken arm inside a transparent cylindrical tubing which was connected to a larger, more impressive set of medical machinery. The arm felt numb now, and none of the doctor's touching of it gave her any pain. With the arm in place, Pei drew out what looked like a trio of gun barrels from inside a cavity of one of the machines. After each gun barrel had been pointed at a different area of her arm within the tube, the doctor pressed a series of buttons, and faint, laser-like beams came out of the gun barrels. After the beams had penetrated the transparent surface of the tubing, they were diffused, entering her arm at several points. The numbness immediately left her arm, and sharp, tingling sensations replaced it. Abruptly, Pei pressed the buttons again, and the gun barrels retracted back into the machine. As he removed her arm from the transparent tubing, Pei said, "How does that feel?" Cassiopeia stretched the arm, then folded it. Even the tingling sensation was fading now. "Feels like it hadn't even been broken," she said. "The bone has been fused whole," Pei said, in a friendly, professional voice. "It's probably even stronger than before." "It's wonderful. Damn wonderful. Thanks, Doc." "With equipment like this, I'm just a mechanic. A talented mechanic to be sure, but just a mechanic. Anything else I can do for you, Cassiopeia?" The offer seemed to mean more than mere medical attention. As a socialator, she was used to even such an oblique approach, and it was easy for her to demur politely. In the corridor outside the sick bay, Starbuck leaned laconically against a wall, still in his flight gear. She smiled, glad to see the brash young officer again. Then she frowned, realizing why he might be waiting for her. "You're going to take me back, aren't you?" "It isn't easy to cop a ride around here." She turned away from him. She felt the blood drain out of her face. "I dread returning to that ship." She did not like to admit it, but she was afraid of the stupidity of the passengers aboard the Rising Star. She sympathized with their plight, their hunger, and their disorientation. But on the other hand, she didn't care to offer herself as a sacrifice for their frustrations. Starbuck seemed to understand, for he said, "Look, maybe I can check around, see if there's any place else you can stay. There are better ships, might even be space aboard the Galactica." Well, if there was anything this young officer wasn't, it was shy. "What's the matter?" "I sense a price tag. Would you be doing this if I weren't a socialator?" "I might. Then again, I might not." "Please don't joke. I'm a little weak. I mean, Okay. Let's forget the little jokes for a while. Look, really, I just want to help you. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" "Well, something personal, but I'll still locate some quarters for you, and that's all. You can break my arm if I'm lying. course, it might be worth a broken arm.
All right.
It's a deal, then?
I think you've made a terrible deal, but all right.
Starbuck smiled genially as he took Cassiopeia's arm, the one that had just been repaired at the life station, and led her down the corridor. Adama, coming onto the bridge, discovered Colonel Tai smiling broadly, clutching the latest reports to his chest as if they were love letters. "What is it, Tai?" "Long-range patrols have reported in. Their scanners find no sign of pursuit from the Cylons. All vectors are looking good. The camouflage shielding that Apollo devised seems to be holding steady. Except for that one flyby some time ago, not a Cylon flight team has been anywhere near us. So long as we remain hidden in space like this, it's highly unlikely they'll find us. Pray the camouflage continues to hold, Tai." "I do that every waking minute, sir. Finding us now would be disastrous. We're not able to mount any heavy battles, sir. Not right now." "I'm aware of that, Tai. Painfully aware." "What do we do next?" "That question I propose to leave to other voices." Tai looked shocked and angered simultaneously. "You're going to go through with that resignation plan, then?" "I'm submitting it to the Council this. Commander, we better talk." "Of course, old friend, but my mind is made up. With fuel and food running low, you can't resign now. If we ever need leadership, the fleet is filled with good men, you included, Tai. The Council will decide." "Commander?" "Yes, Tai." Tai paused, obviously reluctant to speak his mind. "Go ahead, old friend," Adama said. "Say it." "If you resign now, it will look exactly the same as your act of pulling the Galactica out of battle with the Cylons. I'm sorry, but... And I'm sorry you think that. Perhaps the two events are related, and perhaps they merely support my decision that it's time for me to step down." "No, you can't." "I've made my decision." "I can see that, damn it." "Will you accompany me to the council chamber?" "I'd rather not if you don't mind." Adama started to say that he did mind, but instead whirled around and left the bridge. Behind him, as he went out the hatchway, he heard a loud thump. Undoubtedly, Colonel Tai hitting something metallic with his fists. Adama did not look back to verify that speculation. The newly appointed Council of Elders, a temporary assemblage that would govern until a proper quorum could be elected, started voicing their anger immediately before Adama could even finish his resignation speech. Some of them sprang to their feet, shouting,
"No, we won't have it. Unacceptable."
"You can't resign. You especially." Councillor Anton silenced the surge of protest with a sweeping gesture. Anton had, some time ago, been an aide-de-camp to President Adar. A hawk-faced, emaciated old-line politico from Scorpia, he was crafty, but Adama had always perceived him as trustworthy and intelligent. "Adama," Anton said, rising to his feet, "you have led us wisely and well. That's why we can't accept your resignation. Things are too grave now."
"I disagree,"
bellowed Councillor Yuri. Adama had known that if there were to be any serious opposition to any sensible plan, it would originate with the representative of the Leon survivors. Tainted as he was with scandal, his people had nevertheless given him a vote of confidence to continue on the council. "I think our dear Adama is best qualified to judge his own capacity to lead," Yuri said. Adama glanced at Apollo, who was sitting with the newswoman Serena in the gallery in front of the council table. His son appeared to be furious, and the pretty young woman had her hands on his arm, apparently to convince him to remain seated. Adama liked what he had seen of the Caprican newswoman, and liked the fact that she appeared to show interest in his son. Apollo, so unhappy over the deaths of Zack and his mother, needed such a compassionate friend. He turned his attention back to Yuri.
In all due respect, he was saying, I'm not at all sure that the commander has led us all that wisely, all that well. I cannot in good conscience characterize our present predicament as the result of good planning.
Anton shouted.
Yuri, without Adama, none of us would have survived the Cylon. That may be,
Yuri said.
But I place the blame for the chaos that we endure now squarely on the commander's shoulders. Poor judgment in choosing food and fuel lots now leave us on the brink of disaster. Councilman Yuri, Anton said, you have a lot of nerve-casting accusations about food shortages when you've been brought up on charges of hoarding in the face of starvation. Are your hands so clean, Anton? What about...
Gentlemen, Adama interrupted.
Gentlemen, please. This squabbling is not in our best interests. Yuri is not entirely incorrect about the state we are in now. Nor is he unjustified in blaming me. The problem is, and has been, that there are too many of us, too many people, too many ships. We would have troubles even if so much of our food supply had not been contaminated, even if so many of our ships had not proved to be in such unstable condition. If we had time. But that's the real source of our disturbances. We must obtain fuel and food. That's our only solution. Otherwise, we all perish, slowly and gradually as our supplies run out. We have to convert our ships to hyperspace capability and leave behind those that can't be converted. That would mean crowding ourselves together even more, Yuri said. Conditions now are intolerable.
Adama resisted the opportunity to comment on Yuri's own solution to the supposed intolerability of conditions. Yes, Yuri, it would. That's why I've intended to propose that we pool our stock of fuel and send the Galactica and the most capable ships of our improvised fleet on ahead, in order to obtain fuel and supplies for the rest of us. Ships left behind? Yuri shouted. Commander, just how many ships do you propose we send on this foraging mission? Captain Apollo has the hard figures on that, Counselor Yuri. Apollo stood and spoke brusquely, obviously holding in his temper.
About 1/3 of the present fleet. There's just that amount of fuel to spread around. And that's a bit of thin spreading, gentlemen. Thin spreading indeed, Yuri said. I say this is just a ploy for you and your chosen people to escape the rest of us. Leave us here without fuel to die slowly. That is, sir, Apollo interrupted. As things stand, there's not sufficient fuel to get the entire fleet anywhere. We must let those few who can seek out a solution do so. You are your father's son, all right, Yuri sneered. I'm not certain you're not deceiving us in tandem. That is uncalled for, Anton shouted. You know better, Yuri. Are you in league with them too, Anton? Gentlemen, please, Adama said. Hear me out. You sound very authoritarian for a leader who's just resigned, Yuri said. I'm merely advising. Tell us your advice, then. I'm anxious to hear it, Commander.
Adama cleared his voice to buy time. He wished he could make Yuri disappear. It was bad enough having to cope with ignorant opposition in a meeting like this. It was worse to know your opponent was merely a boastful crook who would never listen to reason anyway. I propose, Adama said, that we send our best ships to Carrion for the purpose of obtaining fuel and food.
Carrion?
Yuri asked, a curious sarcasm in his voice.
Why in the 12 worlds an outpost like Carrion?
Carrion was once the object of a mining expedition from our colonies. Rich sources of tilium.
But if I recall correctly, it was abandoned as impractical to mine.
Yuri was obviously prepared. His spies must have obtained Adama's plan before the meeting.
It was abandoned, Adama said, only because there was no local labor, and it was too far from the colonies to make shipping a very practical operation. However, the exigencies of commerce need not concern us now. I do not believe carry-on is a proper solution. The same problems do exist. Carry-on is too far away. Too many disasters could occur to our ships and people left behind. It's the only solution, Yuri. Is it? What about Borealis? It's closer, and we know everything we need is there. Food, water, fuel.
Many of the counselors clearly agreed with Yuri's proposal. How could they be so dim, so unaware, Adama thought.
And there's undoubtedly a Cylon task force there, Adama said. It could be fatal to let down our camouflage shield and attempt landing on Borealis. Possibly fatal, Yuri shouted. To me, it seems surely fatal to use Carry-On as destination. Carry-On is our only hope, Adama said. He noted by a quick count of the nodding heads around the half-circle of the council table that more than half of the group seemed to be on his side now. Gentlemen, you must understand that the situation has reached a critical level much sooner than we'd anticipated. Rations have already been cut by 2/3. We can't afford to squabble any longer. We must act, and we must be able to present our plan of action to our people unanimously. Unanimity means just being your echo, Yuri said bitterly, but he sat down. He was the last holdout to the plan. When the final vote came, Yuri voted for the plan only after the council had agreed to accept Adama's resignation as president, and after they had agreed that Yuri's ship, the Rising Star, would be one of the vehicles chosen for the hyperspace jump to Carry-On. After the council meeting, Apollo felt relieved that a positive action would finally be taken, but unhappy that his father had chosen to resign. He also felt deep anger at the insult Yuri had thrown his way during the meeting. Yuri was just getting back at Apollo for arresting him. A lot of good the arrest did anyway. Yuri had manipulated the situation to his advantage and become leader of the factions opposed to his father.
"You look so sad,"
Serena said softly. She had been standing silently at his side for some time. "Forget it. I wanted to ask you, did you bring Boxy with you over here?"
"Just as you ordered, Captain. I stowed him away in that lovely compartment you provided for us. Thanks, by the way."
"Think nothing of it. Let's go get Boxy." Apollo strode through the labyrinthine corridors with a fierce determination. Serena, although she was long-legged and near his height, had trouble keeping up with him. "How's the boy doing?" Apollo asked just before they stopped in front of the door to Boxy's quarters.
"Still won't eat. Doesn't sleep."
"I think we may have something that'll interest him."
"Right now?"
"Yes."
"But there's so much for you to do, preparing for the trip to Carry-On and all. Shouldn't you be getting your rest?"
"I thought I might sleep better after we solve Boxy's problem."
"That's a tall order."
"Watch me." Boxy, lying on the lower level of a double bunk, appeared as listless as ever. Apollo ordered him to get up and come with them. The child asked if he had to. Apollo said it was orders, and the boy reluctantly took his proffered hand. They traced a circuitous route to an area of the ship that Apollo had only visited 2 or 3 times in his entire tour of duty aboard the Galactica. Stopping at a door marked Droid Maintenance Laboratory, Apollo said, "This is it." He smiled at the confusion on Serena's face as he ushered her and Boxy into the lab. Immediately in front of them was a row of droids, propped up against a wall, all of them obviously switched off. Some of them had been opened up and various wires dangled from the regions of their heads, chests, and legs.
"What are these?"
Droids, mechanical constructs designed to simulate human or animal.
I know what droids are. I thought they were banned.
On Caprica they were. Capricans didn't believe in using mechanical substitutes for human effort. A noble philosophy, but...
I don't know about philosophy, but I do know, in the few experiences I've had with droids, I'm uncomfortable perceiving human traits in something that turns out not to be human at all.
I think you're wrong, but under the circumstances, it's not a worthwhile discussion to pursue. Let me just say that droids have become a necessity for spacecraft. They can tuck themselves into niches that bulkier humans can't reach, and they can perform minor repair jobs on the surface of the ship or in atmospheres we can't breathe. A stocky, middle-aged man in a lab coat came through a door. There was a certain mechanical look to his movements, and Serena wondered if he was a droid too. The way his face lit up when he recognized Apollo proved him to be human after all. "Ah, Captain Apollo. Right on time. We've been expecting you. Is this the young officer who's been put in charge of the new project?" Boxy, surprised at the attention from this stranger, started to hide behind Apollo's legs. "Well, Dr. Wilker, I haven't had time to fully discuss the project with him. It's our hope he'll accept." Boxy pulled on Apollo's leg. Apollo looked down at the befuddled young boy.
I want to go back,
Boxy whispered. "Boxy, this is a military order. We have to at least hear the doctor out. Tell us more about the project, Doctor." Dr. Wilker assumed a professorial manner and addressed most of his next speech to Boxy. "Well, you see, we'll soon be landing on various alien planets. No telling what we'll find there. It's important that we be safe. Ordinarily, we'd have trained Daggets to stand watch at night when our people are asleep in their encampments. But since we don't have any Daggets, we've had to see what we could come up with. We'll call the first one Muffet 2. Boxy looked sideways at Apollo.
What'd he say?
Apollo shrugged. "I didn't really get it at all, Dr. Wilker. Maybe you'd better show us." "Right. Oh, Lancer?" The call to his assistant was as exaggerated a cue as any found in ancient melodrama. Lancer, a young, bespectacled man, held what appeared to be a small bundle of fur in his arms. Apollo knew the short-haired fur was fake, implanted on the droid body, but he would have taken the construct for a real Daggett if he hadn't known better. Lancer put the Daggett droid down on the floor, and it immediately began to bark in a high-pitched, compellingly friendly tone. Moving to Boxy, it stuck out its tongue and began to pant. The wagging of its tail was natural and convincing, unless you looked up close and could see that the tail protruded through a square hole at the back of the droid. "Naturally," Dr. Wilker said, "the first one will have to be looked after very carefully." Boxy, incredulous, backed a couple of steps away from the eager Daggett droid.
That's not Muffet.
Boxy said.
It's not even a real Daggett.
"No," said Wilker softly. "But it can learn to be like a real one. It's very smart. If you'd help us, he'll even be smarter." Boxy couldn't take his eyes off the Daggett. The panting replica of an animal seemed to have a similar fascination for the boy. With the first hint of a smile in several days, Boxy took several careful steps backward from the Daggett, who stopped panting and looked up quizzically. The boy started to turn, and the Daggett ran toward him. Looking back over his shoulder, Boxy started to cross the room. The droid, appearing quite content, stayed at the boy's heels. "We used the image of Boxy you gave us to train the droid to respond to him," Wilker whispered to Apollo and Serena. Boxy stopped walking and turned to look down at the Daggett. Slowly, he opened his arms. The droid moved forward, sat up on its hind legs, and put its paws on the boy's chest. The trying-out period was over. Boxy hugged the Daggett and smiled back at the three watching adults. Apollo smiled toward Wilker and said, "That's one I owe you, Doc." "Any time," Wilker said. As they followed Boxy and his new pet into the corridor, Serena whispered to Apollo,
"That's one I owe you, Apollo.
"Anytime.
You look quite smug, you know that?
If you say so."
But I'll kiss you anyway."